Hey everyone, welcome to the show. War, it's been a part of the human story for as long as we've been telling stories. But can there really ever be justice when something so awful happens? Today we're going to dive into a book you suggested, Looking at Women, Looking at War, by Victoria Amelina.
Ooh, that one's powerful.
Yeah, it is, and it's going to take us right to the heart of this question of justice and how we even begin to grapple with trauma this massive. So if you've ever wondered how people find meaning in the middle of chaos, this deep dive is for you. Amelina, she's a Ukrainian writer, and in this book, she kind of blends her own story, her memoir, with the stories of other Ukrainians, reportage. She takes us right inside the lives of people whose worlds were totally shattered by the 2022 Russian invasion. If you haven't already, grab a copy. We've got the Amazon link down in the description. And of course, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future deep dives.
Definitely. It's worth a read.
Okay, so Amelina starts her book in a way that just pulls you right in. She's on vacation. Picture this. Peaceful Egypt with her son, and bam, news breaks. Invasion. Talk about a mood killer, right?
Oh, yeah, going from paradise to impending doom. It's jarring.
Totally. And Amelina, she captures that feeling so well, being so far away while your home is under attack.
It's that feeling of helplessness, right? Like, what can you even do?
Exactly. And she doesn't hold back on the emotions either. We see her freaking out, trying to get back to Ukraine, terrified for her loved ones. That uncertainty, of what's going to happen makes you realize war doesn't just impact the soldiers. It touches everyone.
It ripples outwards like a shock wave.
And it's not just adults trying to wrap their heads around this. Amelina's 10-year-old son, he asks her, Mom, when's the next time we get invaded?
Oh, wow, that's chilling.
Right? It just shows how this war has become their reality, even for kids. And it brings up this huge question. How do people cope with trauma like this?
Such a good question.
Yeah, so Amelina's book, it offers a glimpse into how Ukrainians have responded. And it's fascinating. There's this common thread, people finding ways to fight back, even if it's not on a battlefield. Like, for example, you're curious about how people document stuff during wartime, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, Amelina tells this story about a woman who was all set to buy a house, a place with a garden, her dream,
Nice.
right? But then, the invasion, and she puts everything on hold. She becomes a war crimes researcher. She
Wow.
chooses to fight back by documenting the atrocities, gathering evidence so those responsible can be held accountable.
It's powerful. Bearing witness like that, it becomes a form of resilience in itself.
Totally. And we see it throughout the book. The librarian who keeps her library open during the occupation, offering a bit of normalcy.
I love that.
A writer who keeps a diary, recording the horrors of war, making sure they're not forgotten. A lawyer who joins the territorial defense, literally taking up arms to protect her country.
All these different ways of fighting back.
Yeah, and then there's Amelina herself. She goes from being a novelist to a war crimes researcher. She doesn't just observe, she's actively involved in seeking justice.
It's like she felt this moral urgency, right?
Totally. Like, writing stories wasn't enough anymore. She had to document what was really happening, the suffering, and fight for accountability. And she's honest about the emotional cost of that.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
There's this scene, it's really hard to read, where she visits a mass grave in Izium. Her reflections on the scale of the loss. It's just
It's a punch to the gut. Really makes you think about the human cost of war.
exactly. And that brings us back to that big question. Can there truly be justice when there's so much suffering? So Amelina tackles this question throughout the book. She digs into international law, how hard it is to prosecute war crimes, that whole long road to healing. Now, you mentioned you were interested in the legal stuff, right? Well, there's this amazing conversation she has with Philippe Sands, this big-shot international lawyer.
Oh, I've heard of him, yeah.
He brings up this idea of prosecuting the crime of aggression, which is basically starting an illegal war.
Right, so not just holding individual soldiers accountable, but going after those who started the whole thing.
Exactly. And Sands points out how insanely difficult that is to prove. You have to establish intent, who gave the orders, the whole chain of command. He even compares it to historical cases, like the Nuremberg trials after World War II, to show how complex this stuff is.
Makes you think, right?
Absolutely. And here's another thing Amelina emphasizes. It's not just about laws and courts. It's also about remembering, making sure the victims aren't forgotten, and that nobody gets to rewrite history to justify the violence.
So powerful.
And this is where her background as a writer really shines. She's a master storyteller, and she uses those skills to craft these narratives that just pull you in, make you feel the weight of what these people went through. One story that stuck with me was about Casanova, this young woman who was already working as a war crimes researcher before the full-scale invasion even started.
Wow, so even back in 2022.
Yeah, even before that, she was already doing this work. She had this whole plan, quit her job, buy a house with a garden, settle down.
And then everything changed.
Exactly. The invasion throws everything upside down. And instead of pursuing her dreams, she feels this responsibility to keep documenting war crimes. She knows it's more important than ever.
Such dedication, it shows the kind of moral compass these people have. They understand how serious this is, and they're willing to put their own lives on hold.
Absolutely. And then there's Irina, this woman who had been captured and tortured back in 2014 by Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they detained and abused her just for bringing food and medicine to Ukrainian soldiers. Just imagine that.
Terrible.
And then when the full-scale invasion starts, what does she do? She focuses on getting her disabled son and elderly father-in-law out of harm's way.
That's incredible. Talk about resilience.
Right. It just shows the strength of the human spirit. And Amelina captures that so well. She describes the day the invasion started, February 24th, 2022, like 40 million birds suddenly taking flight, some fleeing west, some heading east to fight.
Wow, what a powerful image.
Right. It's about mass displacement, but also this surge of patriotism. People forced to make impossible choices, flee or fight. Amelina herself, she chooses to go back to Ukraine. She crosses the border from Poland, going against the flow of tens of thousands fleeing the other way. And she describes coming back to her empty apartment in Lviv. The only sound is the air raid silence.
Haunting.
Totally. It's a reminder that war isn't just about abstract ideas. It's about real people, real homes, real lives disrupted. And in the middle of all this chaos, she tells the story of Efenia, a lawyer who decides to join the territorial defense of Kyiv. We see her enlisting, getting her Kalashnikov, preparing to fight.
Wow, a lawyer picking up a gun. That's a powerful statement.
It really is. It speaks to this idea of agency, people taking control, even when everything feels out of control. And it's not just about physical courage, it's about standing up for what you believe in, for your freedom. Now remember Volodymyr Vakulenko, the children's writer who was abducted from his village near Izium?
Yes, I remember you mentioning him.
Well, Amelina goes to his village, talks to his mother, tries to piece together what happened. This is where her work as a war crimes researcher becomes even more important. She's not just telling stories, she's searching for evidence, trying to uncover the truth. And it's not easy work. She faces roadblocks, lack of information, the emotional toll of hearing these horrific stories. It's a reminder that justice is a long and difficult process.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
Not at all. But Amelina, she's dedicated to this. She understands how important it is to document these crimes, hold people accountable, bring some kind of closure to the families. Her journey then takes her to Lviv, which is flooded with refugees fleeing the east. Her own apartment becomes a shelter, full of families looking for safety.
It's hard to even fathom the scale of the displacement.
Right. Millions of people uprooted from their homes. And in the middle of all this, she meets this incredible woman, Tatiana Palitchuk. She runs the Kharkiv Literature Museum.
Oh, wow, a literature museum.
Yeah, and she's evacuated the whole collection to Lviv. She's determined to protect these cultural treasures, even as the war rages on.
It's an act of defiance, protecting your heritage like that.
Exactly. It shows that war isn't just about destroying buildings. It's about erasing culture, identity. Protecting those cultural treasures, it's like protecting the soul of a nation. Now, as Amelina gets deeper into this work, she goes to Kyiv for training with Truth Hounds, this organization that documents human rights violations. We see her learning about gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, building a case that can hold people accountable.
It's meticulous work.
It is, but it's not just about the technical stuff. Amelina talks about the importance of empathy, of listening, of respecting the dignity of the people she's interviewing.
Absolutely. You can't forget the human element.
Right? These are real people who've been through hell, and you have to approach them with sensitivity. And while she's in Kyiv, she visits the Maidan, that square where protesters were killed during the 2014 Revolution of Dignity.
I've seen pictures of that. Powerful place.
It is, and it creates this link between the past and the present, It shows how this fight for freedom in Ukraine, it's been going on for a long time. It's a reminder that history isn't just something that happens. It's shaped by choices, actions, sacrifices. And the fight for justice, it can take generations. Then, Amelina goes to Bucha.
Oh, Bucha, that name, it's become synonymous with the horrors of this war.
Exactly. The mass graves, the executions, it shocked the world. And Amelina's there, documenting everything, talking to survivors, gathering evidence. It all adds to this growing mountain of proof that will hopefully lead to justice.
It's crucial work. Those stories need to be told.
Absolutely. And then she shares this story, it really hit me hard, about Roman Rakushti, this young activist and environmentalist who was killed fighting near Izium.
It's always the young ones, isn't it? So much potential lost.
It's tragic. War doesn't just take lives, it steals futures. And Roman's story, it shows how young people are on the front lines of this conflict, whether they're fighting, volunteering, protesting, or documenting. Their courage, It's inspiring. Then Amelina travels to Chernihiv, a city that was under siege. She meets Vera, a young writer who kept a diary during the whole thing.
Oh, wow, a diary from a siege.
Yeah, it's a glimpse into what it was like to live through that, the constant fear, the lack of food and water, trying to hold on to some kind of normalcy.
It's a reminder that war is about more than just battles. It's about the everyday struggle to survive.
Exactly. And Vera writing that diary, it's an act of resistance, of bearing witness. It goes back to that theme of the power of words, how they can help us remember, fight injustice, and offer a glimmer of hope. Next, Emelina goes on a different kind of mission. She travels with Oleksandra Matvichuk, who heads the Center for Civil Liberties, to Brussels and London.
To advocate for Ukraine.
Exactly. They're trying to drum up more international support. They meet with politicians, diplomats, human rights groups, anyone who will listen. They're pushing for more military aid, tougher sanctions against Russia, and the creation of this special tribunal to prosecute the crime of aggression.
That crime of aggression Sams was talking about?
Exactly. So you see how Emelina connects the personal stories with the bigger picture. She's not just documenting, she's fighting on a global stage to ensure that these crimes are addressed and that Ukraine gets the support it needs.
It's a reminder that justice needs international cooperation. It's not just one country's problem.
Absolutely. And then she attends his landmark trial, the trial of Vadim Shishimarin, the first Russian soldier to be convicted of war crimes in Ukraine.
That was a big deal.
It was. It was a start. But as Emelina points out, it's just one tiny piece of a much larger puzzle.
So many more need to be held accountable.
Right. And it raises these questions about how far individual accountability can go, about the need to go after those higher up the chain of command. It's a reminder that justice is complex. Then Amelina visits Olena, a friend from Donetsk who'd been displaced by the war. Their conversation, it really highlights the long-term impacts of war, how it upends lives, shatters communities. Olena's story is a reminder that the consequences of war, they ripple outwards, affecting people for years, even decades.
The scars run deep.
They do. And Amelina, then she heads to Izium, a city that had just been liberated from Russian occupation. She goes to the site of that mass grave in the forest. Hundreds of bodies were found there.
I remember those images. It was horrifying.
It was a turning point, really revealed the brutality of the Russian forces. And Emelina's work there, documenting everything, interviewing witnesses, it's all part of building the case for justice. And it's in Izium that she finally learns what happened to Volodymyr Vakulenko, the children's writer. They identify his body among those exhumed from the mass grave.
Oh, that's awful.
It is. Such a tragic loss. Emelina reflects on his life, his work, how dedicated he was to children's literature, and she vows to keep his memory alive. She even shares some of his diary entries, which they found hidden in his home. It's a window into his life under occupation, his fears, but also his resilience. It's a testament to the human spirit, And Emelina makes sure his voice isn't silenced. She goes to Oslo, Norway, for this ceremony where Volodymyr is posthumously awarded a literary prize for his children's book.
A fitting tribute.
It is. She accepts the award for him and gives this incredibly moving speech.
Keeping his memory alive.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in death, art can endure. And it's through Emelina's work that we can make sure these stories, these acts of resistance, aren't forgotten.
That's powerful.
She's not just documenting atrocities. She's celebrating the resilience of the human spirit, the power of art and culture. Her book is a testament to individual action, speaking truth to power, and the hope for a better world.
It really is, and like you were saying earlier, Emelina's own journey, she really embodies that idea of refusing to be a bystander.
Yeah, it's like she couldn't just sit back and watch all this unfold. She had to get involved, use her skills to make a difference, and fight for justice.
And she's so open about the emotional toll it takes on her, too, constantly dealing with the horrors of war.
Right, like she doesn't sugarcoat it at all.
No, not at all. In fact, she even talks about how important self-care is for people who work in war crimes research, acknowledging just how traumatic it can be.
Yeah, she's really emphasizing the need to process the pain, find moments of joy and beauty in the midst of all the darkness.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to cope and to keep going.
And it's not just talk either. Like, remember that scene where she goes to Kharkiv, which had been under constant bombardment, and she visits the Kharkiv Literature Museum?
Oh, yeah, the one that had just reopened after the occupation.
That's the one. It's such a powerful scene. It shows how art and culture can be a source of resilience, like a way to reclaim normalcy and hope, even when surrounded by ruins.
Absolutely. It's a defiant act, a refusal to let the war crush the human spirit.
Exactly. And it ties into something you mentioned earlier about wanting to understand how Ukrainians are rebuilding their lives.
Oh, right.
The fact that the museum is open again, that people are coming together to celebrate art and literature, it's a testament to the human spirit's ability to find beauty and meaning in the toughest situations.
It's not just about rebuilding buildings, it's about rebuilding a culture, a way of life.
And that brings us to this next story, which really drives that point home. Amelina travels to the Shakespeare Cemetery in Izium, where so many victims of the Russian occupation are buried. And she speaks with Tambra, who runs the funeral home there.
Wow, the funeral home.
Yeah, Tambra describes what it was like burying the dead during the occupation. Imagine the lack of resources, the constant threat of violence, the sheer number of bodies. It's just heartbreaking.
It's unimaginable, really.
It is, and it shows how war disrupts even the most basic human rituals, the ways we grieve and honor the dead.
It takes away our ability to say goodbye properly.
Exactly. But even in those circumstances, Temra's dedication to her work, her commitment to burying the dead with dignity, it's remarkable.
It's a testament to the human capacity for compassion, even in the face of such suffering.
A glimmer of light in the darkness. And speaking of darkness, the next stop on Amelina's journey takes us to a place that reveals the true horrors of this conflict. She travels to Balaklia, which was occupied by Russian forces, and visits a former police station that they used as a detention center.
Oh no, I remember reading about this.
This is where we see the systematic use of torture, the deliberate targeting of civilians, the complete disregard for human rights and dignity. Amelina interviews survivors who describe the horrific conditions, the brutality of the guards, the psychological scars that remain.
It's chilling. It's hard to believe that humans are capable of such cruelty.
I know. But Amelina doesn't shy away from these difficult truths. She knows that documenting these crimes, giving voice to the survivors, is essential for holding the perpetrators accountable and making sure these atrocities are never forgotten.
It's about justice, but it's also about honoring the victims.
Exactly, and she highlights the stories of those who resisted, who stood up to their oppressors, even at great personal risk. Remember Fedir Zdebski, the forensic medical expert who was killed by Russian soldiers in Izium?
His story is incredibly powerful. He refused to cooperate with the occupiers, refused to compromise his principles, even when it meant putting his own life in danger.
It's a testament to the human capacity for moral courage, for standing up for what's right, even when facing overwhelming power.
It's inspiring, really.
It is. And Amelina's documentation of Fedir's story, her interviews with witnesses, her determination to uncover the truth, it's all part of this larger effort to ensure that those who commit these crimes are held accountable and that the victims are remembered.
It's about making sure that their sacrifices are not in vain.
Exactly. And she connects this idea of individual courage to a larger historical context. Remember when she visits the Biden Yard Holocaust Memorial Center in Kyiv?
Oh yes, Babyn Yar, the site of the Nazi massacre of Jews during World War II.
That's right. It serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors of genocide and the importance of being vigilant against intolerance and hatred.
It's a reminder that history can repeat itself if we're not careful.
Exactly. And Amelina draws parallels between the Holocaust and the war in Ukraine, highlighting the targeted killing of civilians, the use of propaganda to justify violence, the denial of Ukrainian identity. It's a stark reminder that we have to learn from the past and actively resist those who seek to repeat its darkest chapters.
We can't let history repeat itself.
Absolutely. And she shows how these larger historical forces impact individual lives. Remember Vera, the young writer she met in Chernihiv? Well, Amelina visits her again this time in Vera's home village near the Belarusian border. Vera has returned home and is writing a story about a man who lost all his livestock during the Russian occupation.
It's a reminder that the effects of war reach far beyond the battlefields.
Exactly. War disrupts lives in countless ways. And Vera's story, the story she's choosing to write, highlights the impact on rural communities, the loss of livelihoods, the disruption of traditions, the psychological toll of living under occupation.
It's about the everyday struggles of people trying to pick up the pieces and rebuild their lives.
And Amelina takes these stories, these individual experiences, and connects them to the larger global stage. She travels to London with Alexandra Macichuk, the head of the Center for Civil Liberties, to advocate for greater international support for Ukraine. They meet with Philippe Sands again, discussing the legal and moral complexities of the war and the challenges of achieving accountability.
It's fascinating how she weaves together the personal and the political, the individual stories of suffering and resilience with the larger efforts to hold perpetrators accountable and build a more just and peaceful world.
It's about recognizing that the pursuit of justice is not just a national issue. It requires international cooperation, a shared commitment to human rights, and a willingness to challenge those who violate international law.
It's about working together to create a better future.
And speaking of the pursuit of justice, you mentioned wanting to understand the legal mechanisms for prosecuting war crimes. Well, this next part of the book really gets into that. Amelina attends the trial of Vadim Shishimarin, the first Russian soldier to be convicted of war crimes in Ukraine.
That trial was a landmark moment, wasn't it?
It was. It marked the beginning of the process of holding Russian soldiers accountable for their actions in Ukraine. But as Amelina points out, it's just one small step in a much larger journey.
There are so many more who need to be brought to justice.
Exactly. And it raises important questions about the limits of individual accountability, the need to address command responsibility, and the challenge of achieving justice in a system where those at the top often escape prosecution.
It's a reminder that true justice requires systemic change, not just individual punishments.
And that the pursuit of justice is a long and complex process. Then Amelina visits Elena, a friend from Donetsk who has been displaced by the war. Their conversation highlights the long-term consequences of war, how it disrupts lives, uproots communities, and leaves lasting scars.
It's a reminder that the wounds of war can take years, even decades, to heal.
Olena's story is a poignant reminder that the impact of war extends far beyond the battlefield, affecting individuals and societies for years to come. And it underscores the importance of providing support to displaced people, helping them rebuild their lives, and addressing the psychological and emotional toll of trauma.
It's about recognizing that the process of healing and rebuilding is just as important as the pursuit of justice.
Exactly. And Amelina then travels to Izium, a city that was recently liberated from Russian occupation. She visits the site of the mass grave in the forest, where hundreds of bodies were exhumed, documenting the evidence of atrocities committed by Russian forces.
Izium became another tragic symbol of the brutality of this war.
It did. The images from Izium shocked the world and further solidified the need for accountability and justice. And Amelina's documentation of these crimes, her interviews with survivors, her collection of evidence, all contribute to the growing body of work that will be crucial in holding perpetrators accountable and ensuring that these crimes are not forgotten.
It's about making sure that the world remembers what happened in Izium.
And that those responsible are held to account. And it's here in Izium that Amelina learns the fate of Volodymyr Vakulenko, the children's writer who had been abducted from his village. His body is identified among those exhumed from the mass grave, confirming the fears of his family and friends.
That's devastating. Such a senseless loss.
It is Amelina reflects on Volodymyr's life and his work, highlighting his dedication to children's literature and his belief in the power of storytelling. She vows to continue his legacy by sharing his story and advocating for justice for all victims of the war.
It's a beautiful way to honor his memory.
It is. She even shares excerpts from Volodymyr's diary, which was found hidden in his home after the liberation of Izium. The diary entries provide a haunting glimpse into the final months of Volodymyr's life under Russian occupation.
It's a powerful reminder of the human cost of war.
It is, and Amelina makes sure that Volodymyr's voice is not silenced. She attends a ceremony in Oslo, Norway, where he is posthumously awarded a prestigious literary prize for his children's book. She accepts the award on his behalf, delivering a moving speech that honors his life and work.
A fitting tribute to a talented writer and a brave man.
It is, and it's a reminder that even in death, art can endure and inspire future generations. Then Amelina's journey takes her to Lviv, where she encounters a flood of refugees fleeing the fighting in the east. Her own apartment becomes a shelter filled with families and individuals seeking safety and support.
The scale of the displacement is hard to comprehend.
Millions of Ukrainians were forced from their homes by the war. It's a reminder that war doesn't just impact those directly involved in the fighting, it creates ripple effects that spread throughout society, affecting communities, families, and individuals in countless ways. And amidst this displacement and uncertainty, Amelina encounters a remarkable woman named Tetiana Pilotchuk, the director of the Kharkiv Literature Museum.
The Literature Museum, what happened to it?
Tetiana had evacuated the museum's collection to Lviv, determined to preserve these cultural treasures amidst the destruction of war.
That's incredible. It shows the importance of protecting culture and heritage, even in times of war.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that war isn't just about physical territory, it's also about cultural territory, about the stories, the art, the traditions that define a people. And protecting those cultural treasures is an essential part of preserving the soul of a nation. As Amelina becomes more deeply involved in war crimes research, she traveled to Kyiv to attend a training session with Truth Hounds, an organization that documents human rights violations.
Truth Hounds, they do incredible work.
They do. This training provides valuable insight into the meticulous process of documenting war crimes. We see Amelina learning about the importance of gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building cases that can be used to hold perpetrators accountable. And it's not just about the technical aspects of investigation, it's also about the human element. Amelina emphasizes the importance of empathy, of active listening, and of respecting the dignity of those who have experienced trauma.
It's about recognizing that behind every piece of evidence, every testimony, there is a human being who has suffered.
Exactly. And while in Kyiv, Amelina visits a site that holds deep historical significance, The Maidan, the square where protesters were killed during the 2014 Revolution of Dignity.
The Maidan, a place that symbolizes Ukraine's struggle for freedom.
Exactly. This visit serves as a powerful link between the past to the present. It highlights the continuity of the struggle for freedom and democracy in Ukraine, showing how the events of 2014 laid the groundwork for the current resistance against Russian aggression. And it's a reminder that history doesn't just happen, it's made by the choices people make, the actions they take, the sacrifices they make. And the fight for justice is often a long and arduous one, spanning generations.
It's a fight that requires courage, persistence, and a belief in a better future.
And Amelina then travels to Bucha, a town that became synonymous with Russian atrocities during the early stages of the war.
Bucha, the name itself, evokes images of horror and brutality.
It does. Bucha became a turning point in the world's understanding of the war in Ukraine. The images of mass graves and executed civilians shocked the global conscience and underscored the need for accountability. And Amelina's documentation of these crimes, her interviews with survivors, her collection of evidence, all contribute to the growing body of work that will be crucial in holding perpetrators accountable.
It's about making sure that the world doesn't forget what happened in Bucha.
And that those responsible are brought to justice. Then Amelina shares a story that really hits me hard. The story of Roman Ratushny, a young activist and environmentalist who was killed in action fighting near Izium.
Another young life lost to this senseless war.
It's a tragic reminder of the human cost of war, the potential cut short the dreams unfulfilled. And it highlights the role of young people in this conflict, those who have taken up arms, volunteered, protested, and documented the war, putting their lives on the line for a better future.
They represent the hope for a better Ukraine, a better world.
And Amelina then travels to Chernihiv, a city that endured a brutal siege in the early stages of the war. There she meets Vera, a young writer who kept a diary during the siege, documenting the daily realities of life under bombardment.
A diary from a siege. It must be a harrowing read.
It is. Vera's diary offers a visceral and intimate glimpse into the experience of living through a siege, the constant fear, the scarcity of food and water, the struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos.
It's a reminder that war is not just about battles and military maneuvers. It's about the daily lives of people caught in the crossfire, struggling to survive, to protect their families, to hold on to hope.
Exactly. And Vera's act of writing, of documenting her experiences, is a powerful testament to the human need to bear witness, to share stories, to find meaning amidst the chaos. It echoes this theme we see throughout the book, the power of words to preserve memory, to challenge injustice, and to offer a glimmer of hope in even the darkest of times.
It's about using words as a weapon against despair.
And Amelina then embarks on a different kind of mission. She travels with Oleksandra Medvedchuk, the head of the Center for Civil Liberties, to Brussels and London to advocate for greater international support for Ukraine.
Taking the fight for Ukraine to the international stage.
Exactly. They meet with politicians, diplomats, and human rights organizations, making the case for increased military aid, tougher sanctions against Russia, and the creation of a special tribunal to prosecute the crime of aggression, that same crime that Philippe Sands had discussed earlier.
It's about holding those responsible for starting the war accountable.
And it's about ensuring that Ukraine gets the support it needs to defend itself and to rebuild. It's fascinating to see how Amelina's work connects the personal stories of individuals to the larger geopolitical landscape. She's not just documenting these crimes, she's actively working to ensure that they are addressed on an international level, that the perpetrators are held accountable, and that Ukraine receives the support it needs to defend itself and to rebuild.
It's about connecting the dots between the individual and the global.
And this brings us to a crucial point. The pursuit of justice is not just a national endeavor. It requires international cooperation, a shared commitment to upholding human rights, and a willingness to challenge those who violate international law. You mentioned wanting to understand the legal mechanisms for prosecuting war crimes, and this next part of the book really gets into that. Amelina attends the trial of Vadim Shishamarin, the first Russian soldier to be convicted of war crimes in Ukraine.
That trial was a historic moment, a sign that justice was beginning to be served.
It was. But as Amelina points out, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It raises important questions about the limits of individual accountability, the need to address command responsibility, and the challenge of achieving justice in a system where those at the top often escape prosecution. It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a complex and multifaceted process, and that achieving true accountability requires addressing systemic issues as well as individual crimes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about holding individuals responsible either. She started looking at other ways to approach justice, things like truth and reconciliation commissions, restorative justice initiatives, and the importance of remembering the victims' stories.
Right, it's like she was trying to find a way to heal the wounds, to move forward in a way that acknowledged the suffering but also offered some hope for the future.
Exactly. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about finding a way to rebuild and to create a more just society.
And her search took her to some unexpected places. Like she describes this visit to a village in the Kharkiv region that was occupied by the Russians. And she interviews this woman who talks about just how terrifying it was living under occupation, the fear, the hunger, the random acts of violence.
It's hard to even imagine what those people went through.
I know, but even amidst all that horror, the woman also talked about how the community came together, how people helped each other, found moments of joy, and clung to their humanity.
It's incredible how resilient people can be.
It really is. And Amelina's work, her dedication to capturing these stories, it shows us that even in the darkest of times, there's always that spark of hope, that human connection, that will to survive.
And Amelina herself embodied that spirit. Even as she documented the horrors of war, she never gave up on hope, on the possibility of a better future.
And that comes through so clearly in her writing, even when she's talking about really tough subjects like leaving her son in Poland or she traveled back to Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. It must have been such a difficult decision to make.
She talks about the guilt, the worry, the constant fear for his safety.
But she also felt this overwhelming sense of responsibility to bear witness, to tell these stories.
Exactly. She felt like she had to do it for the people who couldn't speak for themselves, and that commitment led her to some incredibly dangerous places, like that time she visited a hospital in Kharkiv.
The one where she met with doctors and nurses treating victims of the shelling.
That's the one. She describes just how overwhelmed the hospital was, the sheer number of casualties, the severity of the injuries, and the emotional toll it was taking on the staff.
It's hard to fathom just how much suffering they must have witnessed.
It is. And as Amelina saw all this, she started to question whether traditional forms of justice could really address the scale of the crimes that had been committed.
We wondered if something more was needed.
Right, it's something beyond just trials and punishments.
So she began exploring other possibilities like truth and reconciliation processes or community-based restorative justice initiatives.
It's like she was searching for a way to heal the wounds, to bring about real reconciliation and not just retribution.
And her search led her to some interesting insights, like when she visited that village in the Kharkiv region.
The one that had been occupied by Russian forces?
Yeah, she met this woman who had lived through the occupation, and she described the terror, the hardship, but she also talked about how the community pulled together, how they found moments of joy and laughter, even in the midst of all that darkness.
It's a testament to the human spirit, isn't it?
It really is. It shows that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, there's still that capacity for hope and connection.
And Amelina's work, her dedication to capturing these stories, is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always light to be found.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And I think that's ultimately what Amelina's legacy is all about. It's about remembering the victims, honoring their stories, and fighting for a better future.
A future where peace, justice, and human dignity prevail.
Exactly. And I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into looking at women, looking at war. It's been a really powerful journey, and I hope it's left you with as much to think about as it has me.
Me too. It's a book that will stay with me for a long time.
And if you're listening out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Amelina's work and the themes we've explored today. What resonated with you? What questions or insights did it spark for you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this episode insightful, please like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the world of ideas and human experience. Until next time, take care and be well.